Hey YouTube, it's Weird Paul. In February of 1988, I was only a few months away from graduating high school. All of the seniors had to talk to the counselor. I knew that I didn't really want to go to college. I was tired of school after 12 years of it. In the last 3.5 years, I'd made more videos and written more songs than some people do in a lifetime. I told the counselor that my interests were music and video, and she suggested that I check out a tech school. The recording workshop was in Chillicothe, Ohio, about 3.5 hours away from Pittsburgh, but still further west than I'd ever been in my life. It was a school to learn to record, produce, and mix music, and even though I wasn't really interested in a job doing that, I was interested in learning how to make my music sound better. The best thing about the recording workshop was that the classes only lasted for 6 weeks. I wouldn't have to go to school much longer. I had a summer job for about 4 months at a local spray coating facility, but I quit the job at Tri-State Finishing at the end of October to get ready for my trip to Ohio. Besides packing up what I needed for school, I also spent time making cassette copies of some of my favorite vinyl albums that I owned. I couldn't live without being able to listen to them. School started on November 7th, 1988. On November 5th, my dad drove me and my whole family in his new Plymouth Voyager out to Chillicothe, Ohio. The first thing that I noticed there was the smell. It wasn't pleasant. I soon learned that Chillicothe was the location of a Mead paper plant, and the sulfurous smell that enveloped the town came from the chemicals used to soften wood pulp. For my 6 weeks there, I would be living in a trailer park. I stayed in trailer T15, which was in the park closest to the school. My mom took this photo of me right before they said goodbye. The previous student who'd lived there had written "Welcome to the Jungle" on the slats of the bunk beds, a testament to the exact era in which this all happened. I was only alone in the trailer for a short time, and then my trailer mates showed up. I shared the trailer with 2 other guys, Steve, who was from Chicago, and Tom, who was from Delaware. One thing we'd all brought were acoustic guitars, but I'd also brought along a boombox. Tom and Steve referred to it as the shit box, and we started using it to record ourselves jamming immediately. Tom and Steve immediately began calling me Champ, because I was wearing a Champion brand sweatshirt. I started reading the recording studio handbook, the textbook that we'd been given. I learned about knobs and stuff. November 7th was the first day of classes. There were Polaroid photos of everyone attending the school on a bulletin board in the office. I also had a name tag. Hello, my name is Weird Paul. In my journal, I wrote "First day of classes. Strange." And the next day I noted that George Bush had been elected president. Aside from attending lectures on everything from studio diagrams to music theory to copyright information, we were also thrown right into the studio at night to record local bands. We had to pair up with other students to form teams. Team 9 was me, Steve, and Tom. Here's what the floor plan of the school looked like. There were 5 recording studios of varying sizes. We were given a schedule each week of where we had to be at what times. I penciled in when Night Court was going to be on. It was my favorite show, and my dad had left me a little black and white TV to watch it on. After about a week of being there, Steve, Tom, and I wrote our first song together. Steve and I were telling Tom about the movie Cocoon, which he had never seen. Steve said his favorite part was when one of the old guys started fighting off the attendants at the old folks' home. Steve said he was wailing the shit out of guys. I started writing the lyrics to a chord progression Steve had been messing around with, and "Wailing the Shit Out of Guys" was born. My heart is failing, and I'm wailing the shit out of guys. We had the weekend off from school, so we watched cartoons and the movie Saturday Night Fever on TV. Tom was the only one of us who had a car, so he drove us to get groceries, and we went into town and saw the new Tom Hanks movie, Punchline. And we went out hiking in the woods, nearly getting lost. Even though we had to be up early for classes on Monday morning, we stayed up late the night before, recording parts for our new song. town, we bought a toy saxophone for $2, and Steve played that too. The next day was brutal. We were in the studio producing some band until 2 in the morning. We'd forgotten to buy more toilet paper, so for one day, we had to use coffee filters instead. A couple of days later, on November 16th, an instructor grabbed Tom's binder and slammed it down on a console to try to show us what kind of drum sound he wanted. Here's that binder, and as you can see, the rings inside got all bent from the teacher busting it. We spent that night turning the bad experience into a song called The Story of Larry the Dick. We stayed up until 3 a.m. recording it. A couple days later, I got one of my quizzes back. I got 16 right. That was a passing grade. Which was good, because as soon as the weekends arrived, studying went out the window, and all we did was write songs all night. On November 18th, we wrote one of the greatest songs that we came up with, which was inspired by Tom simply picking up a banana and starting to eat it.
Tom is eating a banana now. Tom is eating it, but not a cow. Tom is eating a banana with his hand. Tom is eating it, and it was not planned.
Sometime the next day, Tom walked into the room and told me that I didn't look like a Paul. I looked like a Chuck. We immediately began hours of writing hilarious little poems that were based on the philosophy that Chuck is everything, yet Chuck is nothing.
Chuck is everything, yet Chuck is nothing.
Chuck is drunk, yet Chuck is sober. Chuck is July, and Chuck is October.
There was a lot of laughter.
Chuck is an armrest. Chuck is a brain. Chuck is the barf bag you get on the plane.
And sometimes, I just weirded them out.
Chuck is a needle. Chuck is thread. Chuck is when you get strangled by bread.
Oh my gosh. Damn.
November 21st was my birthday, and in my journal I wrote, "I always fall asleep at lectures." The battery in Tom's car had died, so we hadn't gotten out much. Eventually, we found someone with jumper cables, so we were able to go to the laundromat, where Steve ruined a pair of jeans by trying to dye them in a washer.
My pants got ditched! My pants got ditched! And it makes me cry.
We got up before 6 a.m. the next day to mix down a song at school. I found out I'd gotten an 88% on the test that I just took, which was a relief.
Chuck is Star Wars is on Wednesday night. Dude. Yeah. But what if we have classes during the day? No.
That night, Star Wars was on TV. We only got to see the second half because we were in school until then. But I was still inspired enough to write a song called I Used to Bullseye Womp Rats.
I used to bullseye womp rats when I was back home.
Thursday, November 24th, 1988 was Thanksgiving Day. And I'd been looking forward to that because my whole family drove out to cook a big turkey dinner for me and Tom and Steve.
Chuck.
We played a little concert of some of our new songs for our visiting audience. It sure was great seeing them, and they even brought me breakfast before they said goodbye again. Saturday the 26th was a big day because we had a special guest lecturer at the school. Jeff Workman was a world-famous record producer who'd engineered albums for The Cars, Journey, Motley Crue, Queen, and countless others. He died in 2010. I was there, so I definitely saw him and heard him speak, but I don't remember a single moment of it. That night, we got a little stir-crazy in the trailer, and we kinda trashed it. We piled all kinds of stuff into one spot on the floor, including food, shampoo, and whatever else we could find. It was a mess. Cooked spaghetti was thrown in the air, and it stuck to the ceiling. Then Tom and Steve started throwing a football around. I tried to hide, but I got pegged in the head. Eventually, the football went through one of the windows. Even though cold air was now blowing in through the broken glass, we didn't want to report it, or we'd have to pay for it. The next day, while watching a new TV show called Almost Grown, I wrote a song about all the stuff we did to keep ourselves entertained. It was called Could We Be So Bored?
Could we be so bored tonight?
During the next week, when we didn't have classes, we watched 16 Candles on TV, went into town and got a McDonald's hamburger, and to the movie theater to see The Naked Gun, which had just been released. We even decorated our trailer for the holiday season. One of our instructors, whose name was Rusty, passed out a copy of his own vinyl album that he'd released to each and every student. I wonder how many other people still have theirs. One of our class projects was to add an audio track to a short video of a guy who drops a film reel and dies. Every team came up with something different. Ours predated Super Size Me, with a journalist who ate nothing but fast food to see what it would do to him.
To fully disclose the effects of fast food on the human anatomy, I lived the life of a fast food junkie. The results are disgusting.
His last words were,
My shit's like soup.
I still remember how hard we laughed while we were making that. It was now December, and a few of the students organized a jam session at the Work Stop. The Work Stop was a little pizza and beer joint next to the school. This was my student ID that got me into the lounge. We all got our guitars, and we ended up performing some of our songs for everyone there. I got talked into singing the story of Larry the Dick about the teacher that had broken Tom's binder, and I was scared that he was going to find out. Afterwards, I closed myself up in one of the mixing rooms to hide. Later, I found out that somebody did tell Larry, but he never said anything to me. One night, Tom came back into the trailer and asked over and over if we'd ever had a Grinch party.
You ever had a Grinch party? That was cool. You ever had a Grinch party? I'll wear it now. You ever had a Grinch party? Put it on your guitar. You ever had a Grinch party?
It turned out that a Grinch party was when you watched The Grinch Who Stole Christmas and took a sip of beer every time the Grinch smiled. The Grinch smiles a lot. Unfortunately, we had classes scheduled while the Grinch was on TV that year, so we had to settle for a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer party. He just took a sip every time his nose lit up. I ended up drinking 2 cans of beer.
I'm drunk.
Champ is fucked up. You drank 2 whole beers.
I drank 2 beers, and I don't think that means anything.
It means Champ is fucked up.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm not.
Champ, you just admitted it.
I never said that.
On December 9th, the 5-week course on basic recording ended, and that was when Tom left. Steve and I stayed on for the maintenance and troubleshooting course, which only lasted 4 days. It started getting really cold, and even snowing. And of course, we still had that broken window, so we had to put the oven on, just to try to keep the trailer warm. It was December 12th, and we overslept and missed our first lecture. One thing that everybody had to do was build this guitar cable tester. Lots of soldering and stuff like that. A lot of it was learning mathematical formulas, the kind of stuff that made my brain stop working. The 4 days went by fast, and I stuck around for 5 more days to take the advanced recording class. That's when Steve left to go back to Chicago, but he left me a nice note. When I saw the schedules for the advanced course, I almost lost my mind. There was a 16-hour day with only a half-an-hour break. They moved another guy named Gordon into the trailer, since there was an empty room, but I never even saw him. With Steve and Tom gone, my new school teammates were Matt and James. They weren't as much fun. One of our projects was to record all new voices and sound effects for a Bugs Bunny cartoon. We also learned how to record with MIDI, which was just starting to gain widespread use in studios. December 19th was one of the hardest days of my life. We spent 8 hours mixing down a song called Retribution by a band called The Waiting. And then after a half-an-hour break, it was another 8 hours recording Keep My Eyes on You by a Christian singer named Brian Hitch. I still remember that right before the sax solo in the song, the horn player skidded his sneaker across the floor with a loud squeak. We had to cut that part of the tape out and replace it with a blank piece. Everything was recorded on reel-to-reel tape on spools just like this. You edited it with a razor blade, basically. We finished classes on December 20th, and we had a pizza party. I was so happy and relieved that I'd gotten through all of those challenging lessons. My dad and my family came out and picked me up the next day. I was so glad to see them. And my dad made some of his homemade pizza for dinner. It sure did taste good. I watched the Pee-wee's Playhouse Christmas special, which was airing for the first time, and then I had to do all my Christmas shopping in one day. For Christmas, I got my first CD player. I didn't have many CDs. They were expensive then. And 2 days later, I used what I'd learned to start recording my third album, Now I Blow My ABCs. Tom and I kept in touch by mail for many years. He had a career in acting in TV and commercials. Now we're friends on Facebook. Steve went out to LA and became an assistant recording engineer on some big Hollywood movies. The last time I talked to him was in 1992. I wonder where he is now. Here's my certificates of completion from the school, a letter of recommendation, and the edit projects reel I made that could be submitted to studios looking for employees. The recording workshop is still open after over 40 years. But most of the techniques that I learned for analog tape recording are no longer used. Everything is digital now. I hope that you enjoyed my 30-year look back at my first time away from home. And if you did, don't forget to click on that like button down below. I'll see you soon with more memories. Thanks, YouTube.
Thank you, thank you. It hurts too much to